Why are the two deadliest maritime disasters in history almost forgotten? The worst peacetime and worst wartime sinkings claim nearly 13,000 lives, 5 times more than the Titanic and Lusitania combined. Yet while those names live on in legend, these far greater tragedies sank into obscurity. In this video, we uncover the story of the world's deadliest peacetime disaster, followed by the largest wartime sinking, the greatest maritime tragedies in human history. The MV Doña Paz was no luxury liner. Built in Japan in the 1960s and later sold to Sulpicio Lines of the Philippines, she had been ferrying passengers for decades. Officially, the ship could carry around 1,424 passengers. But on the night of December 20th, 1987, Doña Paz departed to Cloban Leyte packed far beyond capacity. There were well over 4,000 people on board, including many unlisted travelers. Survivors described corridors jammed shoulder to shoulder, families sleeping on decks and floors, children squeezed into corners. It was so crowded that up to 4 people shared a single cot. Many had no tickets at all, stowaways invisible to the ship's paperwork. Overcrowding on inter-island ferries was common in the Philippines, where sea travel is as essential as buses on land. Passengers boarded with a resigned acceptance that safety was secondary to necessity. Few imagined that this routine voyage, bound for Manila for Christmas, would end not in a harbour, but in horror. Safety conditions on the ferry were deplorable. Cabins were dimly lit, and according to later reports, the ship did not have a radio. Basic safety equipment was poorly maintained, and emergency drills were seldom, if ever, practiced. Life jackets were in short supply, and some survivors later claimed that life jacket lockers had been kept locked shut. In other words, nobody was prepared for a disaster. Yet in late 1987, such lax standards were nothing unusual. Many vessels in the Philippine fleet were aging and ill-maintained. Ferry tragedies had happened before, and sadly would happen again. Passengers tolerated these risks as the price of passage, until this night proved just how deadly such negligence could be. Late that night, disaster struck with brutal suddenness. At about 10:30 p.m., without warning, a 629-ton oil tanker, the MT Vector, drifted into the ferry's path. By all accounts, the tanker had no business being there. Its license had expired, it had no qualified master or proper lookout, and it was later deemed unseaworthy. In fact, a Philippine inquiry found that only an apprentice crewman was on the Vector's bridge, while other officers were drinking beer or watching TV below deck. Shortly after 10 p.m, the two vessels collided. The steel hulls tore into each other, and within moments, the Vector's cargo tanks ruptured. Gasoline and petroleum spilled out onto the sea, forming a slick around the ship. A spark, perhaps some metal scraping or an onboard flame, ignited the fuel. Instantly, the night was lit by an enormous explosion that could be seen from miles away. Within seconds, fire engulfed the ferry from bow to stern. Panic and chaos consumed everyone on board. Passengers, jolted awake by the collision and explosion, found smoke and fire spreading everywhere. Lights failed almost immediately, casting the ship into darkness. In that darkness, terrified people stampeded towards the decks and lifeboat stations, screaming the names of loved ones as smoke and heat choked the corridors. But the lifeboats proved useless. Many were frozen in place or could not be released in time. Only a few lifeboats were launched, and those were quickly swamped or capsized under the weight of desperate, frantic victims. With no organized evacuation and no orders from the crew, it was every person for themselves. Many poor souls never made it above deck. Within minutes, thick black smoke filled the lower passenger areas, suffocating people as they slept. Parents carrying children ran through the smoke only to find every escape route blocked by flames. For those who did reach the railings, the choice was agonizing. Leap into the ocean that was on fire, or burn on board. The surrounding sea was an inferno of flaming fuel. Gasoline clung to the skin and clothes of those who jumped, igniting them even in the water. Within about 2 hours of the collision, the Doña Paz sank into the depths, taking most of its passengers with her. The Vector, also ablaze, sank a couple of hours later. Boat wrecks came to rest at a seabed 545 meters down in the Tabla Strait. Out of an estimated 4,385 people on board the ferry and tanker, fewer than 30 survived. In the immediate aftermath, the freighter Don Claudio arrived on scene and managed to pull 26 survivors from the water, 24 passengers from the Doña Paz and 2 crewmen from the Vector. Most were badly burnt. Everyone else had perished so quickly the searchers found no bodies, no life rafts, not even an oil slick at the site. The evidence had been literally incinerated. In 1999, the Philippine Supreme Court held the Vector's owners liable, but Sulpicio Lines, which operated Doña Paz, was astonishingly cleared of fault. The company claimed ignorance of overcrowding, though it was common practice. Families received only about $675 per victim, fueling anger and protests in Manila. The President of the Philippines called it a national tragedy of harrowing proportions. Despite outrage, Sulpicio Lines continued operating for decades. Across 25 years, its ferries caused nearly 5,000 deaths, including the 2008 Princess of the Stars disaster. Only in 2015 was its license finally revoked. The Doña Paz remains the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history, Asia's Titanic, yet scarcely known beyond its shores. Before we proceed to the largest maritime disaster in history, if you're enjoying the video, please hit the like button as it can really help the channel grow, and subscribe for odd or lesser known history. Over 40 years before the Doña Paz burned, another ship, twice as crowded, met an equally nightmarish fate under very different circumstances. In late January 1945, World War II was in its final throes, and the Baltic Sea became the stage for the deadliest maritime disaster of all time. Operation Hannibal was underway, one of the largest evacuations in history. As the Red Army advanced to East Prussia in January 1945, millions of German civilians were frantically fleeing westward, terrified by reports of Soviet revenge and atrocities. In the freezing winter of 1944-45, families trudged through snow and bombardment to reach Baltic ports like Gottenhaven. There, they hoped to find rescue by sea. The Wilhelm Gustloff, once a proud 25-ton luxury liner, lay in Gottenhaven harbour. Designed to carry about 1,465 passengers in comfort, it was now tasked with cramming in as many evacuees as possible. The scene at the dock was absolute chaos. Tens of thousands of desperate people clamoring to escape the oncoming Soviets. Packed far beyond capacity, the Gustloff cast off from Gottenhaven just after midday on January 30th, 1945, carrying a human cargo of staggering proportions. Just how many were aboard will never be known exactly. Estimates range from around 6,000 up to over 10,000. One meticulous research by survivor Heinz Kohn concluded the ship had 10,582 people on board. This included several hundred naval officers, female naval auxiliary helpers, wounded soldiers, and thousands of women and children. In other words, the ship was a floating city of refugees. Every cabin, salon, corridor, and even the drained swimming pool was jammed with human bodies. That evening, the Wilhelm Gustloff sailed into a deadly convergence of circumstances. An overloaded ship, minimal escort, and enemy submarines lurking in the dark waters ahead. The Gustloff's journey should have been under heavy guard, but fate had other plans. Initially, the liner was escorted by 2 German torpedo boats and another transport ship. Almost immediately, mechanical troubles forced one torpedo boat and the other transport to turn back, leaving the Gustloff with only a single escort. Aboard the Gustloff itself were 4 captains from different services: the ship's captain, 2 merchant marine captains, and a U-boat commander overseeing naval trainees. They bickered over the ship's course and safety. One of them, Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Zahn, the U-boat training officer, urged taking a shallow coastal route without lights to minimize submarine risk. But the ship's captain disagreed. When radio messages warned of a German minesweeper convoy in the area, Captain Peterson made a fateful choice. He switched on the ship's navigation lights to avoid collision in the dark. The Wilhelm Gustloff, outlined by her red and green running lights, became a bright beacon against the Black Sea. A perfect target. Lurking nearby in the freezing waters was a Soviet submarine S-13, commanded by Captain Alexander Marinesco. Marinesco had been shadowing the ship for hours, astonished at his luck. Here was a massive enemy vessel lit up at night, virtually defenseless. At around 9 PM on January 30th, the S-13 closed in and fired a salvo of 4 torpedoes in the brightly lit liner. Each torpedo, legend has it, was inscribed with a message of vengeance. For the motherland, for Leningrad, for Stalin, reflecting Soviet rage for the suffering the Germans had caused. 3 torpedoes hit their mark in swift succession. The first torpedo struck the Gustloff's bow, blowing open the forward sections and reportedly causing the watertight doors to seal off the crew's quarters, trapping many sailors. The second torpedo slammed into the midsection. The third torpedo hit the engine room amidships, tearing through the machinery and knocking out all electrical power and communications. Within seconds, the Gustloff was a scene of utter terror. Survivors recalled an instant stampede as thousands of people rushed for the decks. Below, the initial explosions and flooding killed hundreds outright. Passengers on the lower decks drowned as icy seawater poured in or were crushed by collapsing bulkheads. Above decks, mothers with infants and injured soldiers alike slid on the ice-glazed surfaces, struggling to reach lifeboats as the ship began listing. The crew's efforts to launch lifeboats were hampered by the elements. Only 9 lifeboats could be lowered before the ship's severe list made it impossible. In the panic, many lifeboats that hit the water were soon overloaded and capsized. A lot of people jumped, and they all tried to get on the lifeboat and of course pulled you over. It was just gruesome, just awful. Most of them died, a survivor later recounted. A teenage member of the Naval Auxiliary, floating in the frigid sea, witnessed a scene of mercy and horror. A naval officer on deck shot his wife and children to spare them from the freezing cold. Then he put the pistol to his own head. In less than 40 minutes after impact, the enormous liner capsized onto its side. Shortly thereafter, around 10:15, the Wilhelm Gustloff slipped beneath the waves, bow first, into 44 meters of water. Thousands of people were thrown into freezing Baltic Sea. The water temperatures were about 4 degrees centigrade, and the air was about -10 to -18 that night. In these conditions, hypothermia would kill a person within minutes. Many survivors of the sinking only lived a brief while in the water before the cold overtook them. Witnesses described hearing cries and screams, gradually silenced by the freezing water. By the next morning, the sea was littered with bodies. German rescue ships converged on the scene quickly after the distress call. The escort torpedo boat rescued the bulk of the survivors, over 500 people. Other Kriegsmarine vessels and boats in the vicinity picked up others. In total, around 1,200 people were saved. Still, the death toll was astronomical. Of an estimated 10,000 plus people on board, over 9,000 perished, a loss of life greater than the Titanic and Lusitania disasters combined, making it the largest loss of life in a single ship sinking in history. This single sinking claimed roughly 4 times more lives than the Titanic. Outside Germany, few know of the name Wilhelm Gustloff. At the time its sinking received little press. German authorities suppressed it, Allies ignored it, and when reports emerged via neutral radio, they were buried in small notices. In the Cold War, Soviets framed it as a military triumph, while West Germany avoided dwelling on German suffering. With over 9,000 dead, it was the worst disaster in maritime history, yet long a footnote drowned out by World War II's enormity. Only recently have books and documentaries revived its memory. Still, the Gustloff remains overshadowed, its victims largely forgotten beneath the Baltic.